Good morning and welcome to our live webinar on contemporary human trafficking and escalating global scourge. This event is hosted by the Václav Havel Program for Human Rights and Diplomacy at the Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs of Florida International University, and especially as a part of the program's Global Immigration and Migration Initiative. It is also made possible by the generous support of our co-sponsor, the Dorothea Green Lecture Series. My name is Ofelia Riqueses, and I am the Senior Program Coordinator of the Havel Program. I'd like to welcome you all to today's session. Human trafficking is a global and grave crime that involves the exploitation of men, women, and children for profit. Complex networks engage in this lucrative type of human rights violation, taking advantage of victims in special conditions of vulnerability. Most countries have developed legal provisions to punish those responsible for trafficking of persons, but many governments and societies still fail to grasp the severity of the problem within and beyond their borders. We will have the pleasure of listening to what is sure to be a fascinating conversation as our experts shed light on the flourishing human rights problem that is trafficking of persons around the globe and the efforts to combat it. We thank each of you for joining us today. I am now pleased to introduce our moderator for today's session. FIU Professor Sandy Scalani is an adjunct lecturer at the Center for Women's and Gender Studies. Thank you for joining us and for leading this conversation, Professor Scalani.
Thanks so much, and thank you so much, everybody, for being with us today. I have really the honor and privilege to be able to introduce to you this panel of esteemed experts in our field. I've been doing my own work in trafficking for over 15 years, building programs for child sex trafficking victims and teaching a class on sex trafficking at FIU. And this panel really brings a full range of what is human trafficking from a labor, from a foreign-born, domestic, all of the intersecting aspects of human trafficking to light. And I think that we will very much benefit from their expertise today. So I would love to first introduce to you, I'm going to introduce the speakers, and then we're going to give them 5 or so minutes to introduce themselves and discuss the role that they have in combating human trafficking and what they do in their organizations. So first, we have Dr. Suman Kakar, who is an associate professor in the Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice here at FIU, whose primary research has been on human trafficking. We have Samantha Munodawafa, who is a policy lead for global action against trafficking in persons and the smuggling of migrants in Asia and the Middle East. We have Chiara Marinelli, who's a researcher on human trafficking and organized crime in the interdisciplinary group of Foresight for Public Policies, Pontifical Catholic University of Peru. And finally, who will be joining us soon will be Rafael Bautista, who's an expert consultant for the Office for Victims of Crime, Training and Technical Assistance Center, and the National Human Trafficking Training and Technical Assistance Center. So I'm going to start with you, Dr. Kakar, if you would please introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about what you do in relation to human trafficking. I think you're on mute.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us and giving me an opportunity to talk about this very important issue. I am a professor in the Criminology and Criminal Justice Department here at FIU. My interest in human trafficking began maybe 15, 17 years ago. My original research interests had been domestic violence and child abuse, which are very closely related to violent behavior of human beings. And human trafficking became a very important issue to me as I progressed in my academic career. I started working on seeing what is happening or where the higher education can help in making. In 20 years ago, We had just started, even though human trafficking has been a part of our human race. I wrote a book on that. I wrote the history of human trafficking, has been part of us since the beginning of the humanity. Every generation has that desire to exploit others. However, it became a kind of officially research and academic area in 2000 when we had the first act passed in United States as well as the United Nations. So I started looking at what are we doing as a community, as a higher education to make people aware and educate people. So I started exploring the possibility of developing a class, a course on human trafficking. And I developed a course at surveyed all the universities in the United States, and they were very, very few. In fact, none of them had a course designed just for human trafficking. They had a portion in women's studies or in sociology or criminal justice, where they will devote a lecture on human trafficking. So I decided that this is a time that we start to develop a course, and I developed a course. And since then, I've been teaching at FIU, and now even Sandy teaches, and other departments teach human trafficking in from different angles. My role in human trafficking has been very much educational and research. I do a lot of research. I give seminars, I present workshops, I present at national and international conferences, and develop conceptual frameworks to understand why it happens. I began with what is it, and then after that I moved into developing the kind of framework, why it happens, how it happens, what's the profile of a victim, what's the profile of an offender, what are the protocols they use, how they develop and interact with each other. So that's basically my research has been, to create awareness as well as mostly develop the academic community into developing a conceptual framework. Even up to today, we do not have a straightforward conceptual framework that can set the stage for us to theoretically understand why human trafficking happens, who are the victims, who are the survivors, who are the offenders. However, my effort has been in developing that, creating awareness, developing the conceptual framework, doing the research, putting out there for academia, and as well as the general public, social workers, service providers, law enforcement, airport personnel, because human trafficking is an issue that affects, is so multidisciplinary that I think multidisciplinary falls short of, because it's almost everywhere. It's almost all disciplines. No matter what services, businesses, or services providers you are, or where you are, elementary, high, or higher education, is almost everywhere there's a need for that. So that's where my work comes in. I do a great deal of research, present seminars, and educate the general community. Each semester, I have an undergrad class that has 300 students, plus I have a graduate seminar that I teach. So almost every year, 600-700 students take this message to the community, because I teach twice a year, and each semester I have 300 plus students. So they take the message to the community, take it to schools, whatever their profession may be, whether they are teachers, whether they are social workers, or whether they are law enforcement, or wanting to go into law enforcement, or in working in law office, or working in a general community, wherever there is, they take it with them and they become very passionate. So that's my job. That's what I've been doing. That's how much I have been involved into that. I'll go later in detail more about my research and my work as we progress. But right now, I think other people need time to introduce themselves and talk about their work. Yes.
Thank you very much. Ms Monoda, would you like to follow?
Thanks very much. I'm Samantha Monoda. I work with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, based in Vienna, Austria. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime is the guardian of the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime and its protocols on trafficking in persons and smuggling of migrants. It has the protocol on trafficking in firearms. So we play a leading role in supporting countries to comply with their international obligations and put in place a national response to human trafficking within their respective countries. Within the UN, we play a leading role in processes to combat human trafficking. For example, we play the role of the Secretariat of ICAT, which is the Interagency Coordination Group Against Trafficking in Persons. We're active in the UN Migration Network and the Global Protection Cluster. And we produce a lot of issue papers and other standard-setting papers on human trafficking and migrant smuggling, and have supported, resolutions against human trafficking, several resolutions since 2012. My project in particular is active in 5 countries in Asia and the Middle East. These are Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Iran, Iraq, and Pakistan. And under this project, I'm involved in technical assistance delivery. What this means in practice is we have a pillar on strategy and policy development. And this is where I am most relevant, supporting countries to develop their national strategies and action plans to combat human trafficking, supporting them in developing, policy position papers that sort of design or set out what the national plan is to respond to human trafficking, migrant smuggling, strengthening national coordination mechanisms, data collection systems, research, other things that help to have strengthened policies against human trafficking, migrant smuggling. I'm also involved in legislative assistance. This entails supporting countries to develop legislation on human trafficking, both principal legislation and subordinate legislation, so the implementing regulations and the rules, as well as even guidelines that help in the implementation of the legislative frameworks. We also do quite a lot of capacity building work. I, in particular, specialize in working with judges and prosecutors, as there's quite a lot of legal interpretation issues that come up in this kind of training, in these kinds of trainings. And we also support regional and trans-regional cooperation. As we know, trafficking in persons is often transnational in nature, and regional and trans-regional cooperation is really critical to getting to the root of the problem and dealing with the main culprits instead of just getting the small players on the ground where the arrests usually happen. There's also a pillar on protection and assistance to victims. And my role in that would be to support, for example, legal aid organizations in the ones that are involved in giving legal services to victims of trafficking on the ground. Annually, UNODC releases biannually, not annually, every 2 years, biennially, we release a report with statistics on human trafficking and migrant smuggling. And this is something through our technical assistance project that we contribute towards. I'll share some of the findings later, but the last one we released was in 2020. But just from what we collect from within the countries in supporting them with their research and data collection efforts, there's also a lot to be learned. So I can also share that a bit later. Prior to this, I worked in Southern Africa, where I was managing the Human Trafficking and Migrant Smuggling Project, doing similar technical assistance work, but in the 15 countries of the Southern Africa region, of the SADC region. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very impressive work you've been doing. Ms Marinelli?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. I work basically in Central and South America, and my approach is a bit more practical. I'm a lawyer, so I started, of course, with research on human trafficking as a junior researcher. But then very, very quickly, I moved into the public policy sphere. I was an advisor for the National Commission Against Human Trafficking in Peru for several years. And there I contributed to the fight against human trafficking, first of all, by developing policies like on prevention, prosecution, and protection. I worked for the Interior Minister, and we were we had hold the presidency of the commission. So we overview all the three aspects of the fight against this crime. And also we developed the public policy, or the Peruvian public policy, on migrant smuggling or human smuggling. And through this approach, I think that what both of my colleagues or the co-panelists said are very important, because I came from the sphere of the government. And a lot of times, or you will see, like I also can share some data later, but in South American, Central American countries, government require this assistance of international organization and academy. But the problem is that sometimes, and that is something that I really like about Dr. Kakar, that open discourse on human trafficking, because most of our university doesn't have it. And we have a lack of information. We cannot build evidence-based policies. So what we did was talking with the prosecutor, the police, the people the NGOs who work in the topic, to build a national action plan, to develop new rules in the penal criminal code. And so more or less, this is the work I did in the government. And after I left the government, I started working as a consultant for international organization. And right now, that is my main focus. I provide a recommendation to the governments to tackle human trafficking, but in the sphere of organized crime. And this is something that I really want to focus today, like the intersectionality of human trafficking, not only in the gender dimension, that I think it's a bit more developed right now, but also with other phenomena that are currently happening in Central and South America. And this is migration, including refugees and internal displacement, organized crime, and we will see that we have a whole variety of organized crime and corruption, and also the focus that we have, or that our prosecutor or the administration of justice institution has, on sexual exploitation and women and girls. And we are completely, all labor exploitation, men's or LGBT people victims are completely invisibilized, at least in our continent. So this is more or less my work now. Recently, I have done a report for UNHCR about organized crime and Venezuelan migrants. And right now I'm working in Central America, in Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Guatemala, with data protection and NGOs. So I have like a different background, but I hope that I can help with your question and solve some issue that can arise about Central and South America. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Bautista, are you here with us now?
Hello.
Hi
Hello.
there. Hi, now we hear you.
Hello.
Hi, we can hear you.
Wow. Hello. Hi, I'm on mute. I just cannot hear.
I can hear you. We can hear you.
Hello. Hello.
Look, we can hear you, but you can't hear us.
Hello. I cannot hear anything. I will reconnect.
Okay, so we can just continue on then. If you would like to answer some questions about, what is human trafficking? What does it look like where you are primarily working, and just some kind of basic facts for our audience. Go ahead, and anybody can jump in if you feel so inclined.
Sure, I can come on the what is human trafficking. I'm sure quite a lot of people already know on this on this platform, but just based on the protocol, the Trafficking in Persons Protocol, it's in Article 3. The human trafficking consists of the act of either recruitment or transportation, transfer, harboring, receipt of a person by certain means. And these means include threat, force, coercion, abduction, deception, for the purpose of exploiting that person. And exploitation is maybe one of the key elements that really is the core of the offense. And the forms of exploitation include sexual exploitation, exploitation of the prostitution of others, forced labor or services, slavery, practices similar to slavery, removal of organs, and servitude. So here's a nice dictionary definition. I'm sure someone will come in and say something more interesting. So I just thought to throw that in from the protocol, please.
Yeah, we definitely need to at least get the definition in there, because we don't know who's in the audience and what level they come to the table with already with the knowledge of trafficking. Mr. Batista, are you able to hear us now or no? Maybe not. Okay.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yes, I'm able to hear you.
Wonderful. Can you please introduce yourself, give us a little information about the role you play in combating human trafficking?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to share a little bit of what I've been doing in the past years. My name is Rafael Bautista. I'm originally from Mexico City, Mexico. I'm gonna call it how it is, so I can be very professional and say I'm how do they title this now? I'm a life experience expert. But the reality is that I'm a survivor of labor trafficking. I've been in the movement for more than 10 years. I was leading a group in Sacramento, California. I'm a self-sufficient individual now. I'm a paralegal in a local law firm. I've been a consultant for many federal organizations. But the thing that I'm more involved is my community and my culture. I've seen a lot of lack of information and knowledge about human trafficking in regards with men and boys. Culturally speaking, we are like way, way behind anything that you can imagine in regards with human trafficking. But the most, well, I do conferences, I do training, I do all kinds of stuff. But the most important thing is support my brothers and sisters that are still being trafficked today, and creating awareness and bringing to the table probably some different perspective, and not just what the books and the research sometimes we hear, because we hear from people that is ready to talk. Like I was leading a group of survivors in Sacramento, people that nobody never invite them to a presentation or to speak or say anything. So thank God I have the ability to have contact with them and bring that information to Optic, NITEC, obviously TICTEC, and any organization to really reach out to me and I'm able to share, I will do it. And I do it most of the time. So that's what I do.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I would love to hear from you all what you think are kind of the most important myths to shed light on around human trafficking, and why it's important to understand trafficking outside of these myths and kind of images that we see.
If I can jump in, I want to remark what just Rafael says about how human trafficking right now invisibilize I don't know if the word is the right one in English, but we hide how many men and boys are under human trafficking right now. And I have the data of the last UNODC report. And of course, this report take the data from the government. So we have to be very careful when we read the reports or the research, because this is based in official data or maybe NGOs data, but that doesn't reflect the reality. So it says, for example, that 69% of the victims are under sexual exploitation in South America. But I have been working there in the territory, and I can say that we have huge number of labor exploitation in the continent, and people who are recruited to go in other continents like Europe, USA. But these cases are so broadly and is so common that we can see it in agriculture, in the textile industry. We don't even need to go to the mining sector. We have it in the cities. And we are not doing enough, I feel, as academia, NGOs, international organization, of course, government, to give a voice to these victims. And we have something that I call in Spanish is sexualización, but in English is sexualization, I think, of the human trafficking. So we are very strong in tackle that issue. We are not, of course, doing great things to protect our victims, but at least we have some data on that. But the data on labor trafficking is very low. And right now, I think that is an issue that we have to bring into the table, I think globally, but specifically for Central and South America. So I'm very happy that Rafael is here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to add to what Rafael and Shara said, absolutely, even though in the United States, like you said earlier, we are very open. And I teach a course and I can vouch for that my students take the message to the community and become very active in that. But it's very sexualized issue. It's the reality of human trafficking. I did a paper, I presented a seminar on what human trafficking is. The reality of human trafficking is that it's a global phenomenon, and victims are exploited for a variety of labor and or commercial sex tasks. However, because we are we dramatize so much that because sex trafficking takes over the media, and little girls and women take over, so the boys and men are basically ignored or are not looked at, because what sells is what media propagates. So as a result, that segment of the population, and labor trafficking, even though labor trafficking is as much part of that, and boys and men are as much victimized as girls and women, but that segment of human trafficking remains hidden. And it has a great deal of racial, gender, and socioeconomics undertones as well, because we focus on certain victims, not really the reality of human trafficking. And there, like we were talking earlier, there are more than 40 million people trafficked in the world every day, on any given day. And more than 25%, more than 27% are boys, little boys. But we focus on mainly on girls and women and sex trafficking. So a lot of things, facts that are, even though we have an open discussion and we collect data from government agencies as well as nonprofit, social worker agencies, law enforcement, it's still a great deal of it remains hidden, especially labor trafficking, men and boys. Yes, absolutely. Both of you made a very good point. Yes.
Can I just add to that? I agree with the points that were raised by the previous two speakers. But also just to add that I think part of the reason for the underreporting of labor exploitation is with sexual exploitation, it's really in your face. It's something that people will go to the police and everybody agrees that something was done wrong and a crime was committed. But with labor offenses, they're often dealt with not under criminal justice, but under civil law, for example, and it's often controversial when labor exploitation has now made a leap to trafficking in persons. So you find that in terms of how it is classified, it ends up being lost in terms of the reporting. In many countries that we work, you have specialized labor courts, for example, and there are many cases which, when you read, would qualify as human trafficking, but maybe will never reach that classification because they're not even in the criminal justice system, and would not be directed in that sense. So I also think this is one of the contributing factors to why maybe there's more of an emphasis on sexual exploitation. Also with labor exploitation in the regions where I work in Southeast Asia and in Africa, it was domestic servitude. That was a very big thing. Domestic servitude of underage children, but this happens in people's homes, so police officers are likely to raid a brothel than someone's private home. So you end up missing out on all those many children that are in a situation of servitude or in exploitative circumstances. So there really are challenges in terms of strengthening capacity to identify forced labor and classify it correctly so that it can be more accurately accounted for in reports and in the public domain. But a myth you mentioned about some of the myths that are there. The one I wanted to highlight is, I think, the perception that human trafficking is only for people who are poor, people who are uneducated. This is a myth. Human trafficking affects everybody across the board. And it's just about being aware of the kind of ways that traffickers work to lure people. These days, we're seeing a lot of people operating online using deceptive tactics to put people at risk, using social media platforms and others. Yeah, so this is one myth I wanted to highlight. Thanks.
Thank you.
No, I think you make a very, very excellent point, because it remains, human trafficking happens right under our nose, especially labor trafficking. They are everywhere. They're in restaurants, they are in hotels, they're in construction, they are in farming. But we look at them as laborers, not as trafficked people. You're absolutely right. You go to any nail salon, beauty parlor, restaurant, hotel industry, all the cleaners, cleaning industry, construction industry, we look at them as laborers, not as trafficked people, even though they may be. Cruise industry, that's another one. And then, of course, internet now has kind of globalized the phenomena, and they are recruited from everywhere. They can work from everywhere. Yes, absolutely. I think that's another reason why it's so hidden, that it happens right under our nose, and we are not very, or we are afraid to, because there's a very fine line between a person, an employee, and a trafficked victim. And because we don't know whether he or she is working as a really employee or as is trafficked as working as illegal. So we don't know that. So that's another effort where we need to fight, where we need to create laws or create public awareness, as well as create protocols so that they can be detected and helped.
Thank you. Mr. Bautista, did you want to say something about myths or?
Yes. I hear a lot of things in this conversation. Please forgive me if I say something wrong. As a survivor, I probably function a little bit differently than how we see it from another perspective. I support the TVPA, Trafficking Protection Act of 2000. If we talk about labor trafficking, there's a thin line between human exploitation and human trafficking. That's a myth. That's why labor trafficking is so complicated, because no trafficker or employer will keep records of my crime. They make you part of the crime, first of all, if you are part of the vulnerable population, and I'm going to be very honest, undocumented, and that you migrated from your home country and you have a language barrier. So they make you part of the crime, or they make you the criminal. But up to date, 22 years later of the creation of TVPA, we still underseen labor trafficking. We even created HB1 visas. They would attach workers to employers, make them very vulnerable. When I was invited for the first time to Washington, D.C. to a presentation after my trafficking situation years after, I was living in a different world, thinking that only undocumented male, not able to speak English or communicate were the victims. When I got to DC, I noticed that it was everyone. Human trafficking do not discriminate. That's the only thing that will not discriminate you. You can be rich, poor, yellow, orange, black, brown, white. Who cares? You could still be a victim. Your sons, your nephews, your grandchildren. There is always an abusive person around. And the worst part, the abusive person, this is based on my experience, which is my personal opinion. It's people in power, people with money, people who can have control over the vulnerable population. And if you add the dysfunctional family that we're coming from our third world countries, about smuggling, not all people who cross the border are going to be trafficked. Many, and I will say high percentage will become victims. But something that I want to touch base is, please, something that I want to explain to you, I work a little differently. My brain is a little different. I can be talking about something will get on it and I have to switch. But then if you refresh my memory and just give me the last word I say, I promise I get back to it. When I got the flyer, I just work differently, I'm sorry. When I got the flyer for this invitation, I called Ophelia right away. The next minute I sent her an email and I call her. I say, no, this is wrong. And this is really wrong. Why? Because we're not being trauma-informed. We put in an image that is not appropriate to what really 21st century trafficking is happening. Everybody thinks they're, we have change, you beat up. No, I was able to drive a car. I was able to go outside to the store. It's more psychological. And they know everything about you. Now you're vulnerable because you have a language barrier, because you don't have any family here, because you're trying to live the American dream. That's why everybody leaves their country. And I'm gonna ask all the panelists, all the persons here, who will leave their home country just for fun? Or just because I don't wanna see mom again, or dad, or my brothers and my sisters?
Nobody.
So we have a need to live or survive. That's why we are called survivors. We survive and we live cartels, we live severe poverty. And part of the issue, and I know the lady from Peru, I forgot your name, girl, sorry, will agree with this. People in Mexico, and I'm gonna speak about Oaxaca, Mexico. People in Oaxaca will earn $5 a week, okay? We're gonna say it's 200 pesos. 200 pesos a week. And they barely surviving. When they came into the United States and they start picking strawberries, tomatoes, and working on the fields under a very, very bad circumstances and situations that I've been seeing lately in California due to the COVID-19, and they making $10 a week for 120 hours of work. They send in those same $5 plus one, they send in $6, so now they send in 250 pesos to Mexico, and they think they're killing it, yay! They're making it happen, which is a lie. They're being victims and they're being trafficked. They on fear of deportation, they have the threats, but it's a cultural issue. You're not gonna see doctors, engineers, politicians migrating to another country to send money. No, those are the people in control. And recently, not that long ago, I learned the United States give Mexico like, man, tons and tons and tons of money. And Mexico is severely poor. So where is that investment going through? Where is all this money going to programs when I don't see survivors really coming out and being educated? I got really blessed by becoming a paralegal, and the organization and my case manager helped me out and pushed me to educate myself. But I don't see that happening today. The new organizations are more worried about what they see always going to make, or how are we going to comply with the grant? We need to do this so we can comply with the grant so we can get another grant. And we are not being survivor-centered and survivor-informed and trauma-informed, like Dr. Dakar says, or mentioned earlier. People are more I call it trauma porn, because they want to hear, how many times were you raped? Were you having sex? Many labor trafficking survivors, we also are sexually abused or assaulted. But we minimize that. And we increase the trauma of sex trafficking. But labor trafficking, it was just labor. They just put you to work. Trauma is trauma at every level is the same. And I think we have to be more conscious and aware when we're creating these seminars. What are we gonna reflect? And when I call Ophelia, I mentioned to her, it would be better just to put a kid on the caravan, because that's most likely that's the reality of what's gonna happen. That kid is gonna end up being trafficked in a field in California, than having a kid tied in a, you know, it doesn't see that no more. Well, at least here in California, I don't think even that's trauma-informed images.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I was specifically hoping that you would bring that up. I think that's a learning and teachable moment for people, because that's a very typical imagery that we see in the anti-trafficking movement in general. And I think it, definitely is perpetuating stereotypes and really steering people the wrong way that even want to help, just kind of not understanding what trafficking really is, or who the victims really are. These are, you guys brought up a lot of really great points. I'm wondering, do we have any questions from the audience? I don't want to cut that time short. So if we have any questions from the audience, please feel free to send them by chat or. Great, you can always jump in anytime. So I heard a lot of statements around how anybody can be a victim of trafficking. Okay? And so it's not only kind of this young, pretty girl in a cage who's a total victim of sex trafficking, which is the dominant image, that anybody can be a victim of trafficking. But I also teach class where the majority of my female students are terrified of being victims of trafficking. And so there's definitely a trend as far as how at risk are kind of people in our audience. For example, how at risk are people on a general basis? Should people be afraid of being trafficked themselves? And I would like to kind of get a little bit more perspective and bring a little bit more perspective to that.
Yeah, I think I can speak for that. I don't know if there's a question from the audience, or I can talk.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, people have to recognize that anybody can be a trafficking victim. These traffickers, given the platform, social media platform, have become very, very smart now. All the job advertisements, all the people are recruited from other countries. If you look at the cruise industry, there are cooks, there are people, servers, waiters, who have degrees in computer engineering, who have degrees in higher degrees, but they come as legally because the advertisements are there. But when they come here, they're exploited. Like Rafael had said, there's a very fine line between exploitation and trafficking. They are brought here by the legal means, but then they are put into different situations, and where they don't know the language, they don't know the laws, they don't know, so they kind of become victims. So in order to recognize, people have to be very aware of they are no longer in chains, they are no longer in cages, they are no longer just pretty girls. They are boys, they are girls, they are women, they are men. So the general public has to be absolutely aware of that they can come in any form, and your students are rightfully fearful of that, because the advertisement they are applying to, they don't know whether they are real or not, and it's very, very, very difficult to find that out. Yes.
If I can jump in, I think that it also depends on the context, because I agree with Rafael that in South and Central America, and I include Mexico there, is most poor people who doesn't have access to education, to jobs. Like it's not everyone really, but it can change. So for example, right now with the Venezuelan crisis and all the migrants from Venezuela in South America, we had more cases of well-educated people that had a good job in Venezuela, but they had to left their home, their work, everything. And they say, I don't have any other option. So I have to do this because I have to survive. I have to send money back home. As Rafael say, I'm illegal here. So if I am exploited, most of them think they cannot go to the authorities and complain, or they don't know where to approach services of protection or attention. So I don't know if I can say everyone can be a victim of human trafficking, because I think that after a certain level, if like at least in South America, false job offers are so obviously that if you have a minimum of education, you can say. But that doesn't mean that you are not going to accept, because maybe you have education, but you don't have a job and you have to support your family. And that says, okay, I wanted to bring before a testimony of a survivor who says, like, yes, I was exploited, labor exploited. And sometimes I wish that labor inspection came and make like the exploiters pay. But at the same time, if they came, I'm losing my job. So there is always this like internal debate. I think that, yes, I know that I am under exploitation, but not necessarily I can go and complain because I don't have any other chance. So I wanted to bring this issue into the debate because I really think that it depends on the context. And sometimes also educated people can be victims, but it's not so common, at least in Central and South America.
May I add, man?
Go ahead.
Okay. She just bring a very important point to my head, and your question was how vulnerable can we be, right? Can you rephrase your question, please, Sandy?
So I just was asking for a little more depth or context to the idea that anybody can be a victim.
Yes. Well, Central, I will say Mexico and down, we have a cultural issue, a huge, and I know some of the panelists touch bases about how mom, and it's very common here, I've seen it a lot, that we bring mom from Mexico, and basically we're exploiting mom. Mom has to clean the house, mom has to be at the babysitter, mom is cooking, mom, and I don't have to pay mom. But it's a cultural issue because we make it normal, we normalize those things. I do believe what Chiara is mentioning, in our countries, not everybody, because people in power, you're not going to see the son of the politician being a victim. But here in the United States, there is probably people with money, but the kids can still be victims of trafficking. You can be in university and be a victim of trafficking. I was recently in contact with a case that they bring a guy for a university, and he was doing a great job. He speak English. He didn't have a lot of barriers, but he was on an HB1 visa. They attach it to your employers, and they make you threats. And once I always preach this for service providers, if we have any service providers or law enforcement in this course, you have to create a breach of trust. If we don't create that, how we end up being trafficked? Because I trust someone. That guy earned my trust. I told him where I live, what I did, how much I ate, everything about Rafael he knew. Same thing for you guys. We don't need any superheroes. We don't have any superpowers. We're human beings, and we just have to be kind to the next person next to us and see really what's happening. Pay attention to your neighbors. There is always someone bringing that trash can out. And I know a case that someone saw a lady that the only time the lady go out of the house, it was just to push the trash can. Make the call. Silence is a crime. Speak up, but be kind. We don't have superpowers, and we're not gonna change the world today, but we can change our community. That's why I'm more involved in my community, because if I impact my son's school and the people living on my street, they can go and change something else. But if I come to these seminars without thinking about my neighbor, I'm wasting my time. So I'm trying to change something that I don't have control, but I do have more control in my street, in my community, in my son's school. I'm sorry, I went in a total different direction. But paying attention really to the migration, I'm gonna go back to the migration. Now, who is living their home countries? And what are the consequences on our way over here? Same thing I believe is happening probably in Europe. The cartels are taking advantage, and I hear from a friend. Now, people who are running the crime in Juarez, Mexico, are people from El Salvador, from Guatemala. Now, Mexicans are being victims in their home country from people that are more violent and more aggressive. That's also a reality too. And two of my friends, my cousin was really in Juarez, and two of my friends here from California were in Mexico. They're like, I'm surprised. Yeah, there's a lot of good people migrating, but there is also part of the cartels and criminal activity that are moving with this so they can recruit. And I'm assuming, this is my personal assumption, for trafficking a lot.
Mhm.
You have to pay attention to those things.
Yeah, thank you. So what I'm hearing is that while anyone potentially can be a victim of trafficking, it really takes vulnerability into account. So people that have some kind of vulnerabilities, whether it's financial or language barriers or cultural, not being from a country, or age or other disabilities, things like that.
Yeah, we see the examples here in the United States: forced youth, homeless people, LGBTQ, migrants, people on parole and probation, vulnerable populations.
I want to make sure we get a chance to answer the question that came in before we end. Coming from Victor Williams. Hi, Victor. Nice question he's throwing out here. Just the easiest question of all regarding trafficking. Thoughts on the decriminalization of selling or buying of sex? You're on mute, Mr. Bautista. You're muted.
Well, I will give my opinion because I think this is a very difficult question. But what I have learned by analyzing how organized crime works in the territory is that it doesn't really matter if you made it legal or illegal. If there is an activity, an economic activity, and there is a profit, they are going to be there. Maybe they are not going to recruit and exploit the girl, but they are going to extortion it. For example, that happens in Colombia. There is a lot about also Venezuelan migrants and refugees, and we talk about survival sex. And I question, or I'm skeptical about this survival sex, because I say, okay, we have this territory of Colombia, but it can also be Mexico or Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala. And we have all these organized crime groups that control every activity. So if I am a sexual worker and I gain some money, they are going to come and say, okay, where is our part of the money? So I'm really don't know if this is linked, if human trafficking is really linked on the regularization of sex works. But this is, of course, my personal opinion. I'm willing to hear all the other panelists.
And keep it short, because you have about 30 seconds to answer this question before we have to wrap up.
I'm gonna keep it very short. In South America, it's a little different. They have to pay what's called derecho de piso. Here in the United States, that's a very, very tricky question, because we know, I know for Sacramento in California, many new students or people who are seeing that they can make $3,000 a night and they can focus in college, young girls, they decide to do the sex work. Do I support that? No. Do I have to criminalize that girl that wants to be someone and don't get a big student loan and be on debt for the rest of her life? I don't know. But I know that we have to hear from them too. And it'd be great to have a panel where we can really hear from someone that is doing that job. Because hearing it from us, it's just an opinion. And it's not the reality of what she is. Why is she there? That'll be the question. So that's a hard question.
I agree that I think we need more forums to bridge that gap. Do either of you want to answer that question, Dr. Kakar?
I think, yeah, it's the economic factors, structural factors, and the cultural factors all contribute to, if we decriminalize or keep it as it is, really will have very little effect. Decriminalizing will make it probably easier for some people, but then the other people, the greed, the profit will take some of the activities underground, because trafficking will continue because it's economic activity, it's structural activity, it is cultural, due to all those different factors that we have identified. It will continue. Decriminalization may help a little bit or not, it remains to be seen, because other countries have done it and haven't really made any dent. So I really don't have a solid answer for that, but that's my opinion, yes.
Thank you.
Sandy, I want to answer the question, how well government programs work. That's the second one on the chat.
Yeah. I was actually just going to start wrapping it up and ask you guys in your closing statements maybe to address that question as well, which is how well the government programs are working. Yeah, thank you.
I think Samantha will do a good job. I think Samantha, yes, please. That's my student. Please answer that question. Yes.
Yeah, so I think, I don't know which government he's referring to, but I think if there is a government program, that's a good start. I come from Zimbabwe originally, and I remember a time that there was no recognition of the crime of human trafficking. And a month after the Human Trafficking Act was passed, 200 cases were reported. And investigations began and prosecutions began. So it begins with having, firstly, a framework that recognizes it. Luckily, globally, almost everybody now has a law on human trafficking. It's, the Trafficking in Persons Protocol is one of the most widely ratified. Effectiveness on the ground, of course, is still a very young framework. So there's still quite a lot of work around the capacity of law enforcement to identify and protect people. I think Raphael did a great job of explaining that, just people understanding that, the business model of traffickers now is subtle coercion. It's not like people in chains necessarily, but the clever trafficker works in a way that you can't tell. It's not a, in your face project. So sorry, you said in 5 minutes, so in 2 minutes. So government programs, yes, often have quite a lot of gaps, but it's good when they are there, because then there's potential for improvement in the future. Because then there's an entry point, there's somewhere to start. That's the point. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And just to wrap it up, another 30 seconds or a minute for you all to answer the question, and maybe to give an action item for people. What would you like people to do? Go ahead.
One thing, government programs do work. I'm the proof of it, because I went through governmental programs. But we have to see who is running the program, and if they are created for everyone. I remember running as looking for help, and everything was created for girls and women. And even on many of those places, they asked me the question, "What are you doing here? This is for girls." But I stuck to it because I needed the help. The biggest recommendation I can give you is be kind, be you. But if you encounter a victim, a survivor, anybody, think about this. How would you treat your brother, your sister, your family member? How would you treat this person that you don't know? The only thing you know is that he's a survivor of human trafficking or a victim of human trafficking. How would you treat that person? the same way you treat your brother or your sister if she was in that situation, that day we're gonna change the whole course.
I will follow Rafael. For me, yes, governments are doing things. I work there. But what I wanted to recommend to all the people who is hearing us today, and I assume some of them are Dr. Kakar students or future specialists in the topic, is to try to intersect. So right now, most of the governments, but also NGOs, international organizations are, so the ones who are working human trafficking are here, then we have migration here, then we have organized crime here, and then we have development over there. And if we are not able to interconnect all these topics and understand that in the ground, in the territory, all these topics are related, I really don't think that our project can reach the outcomes that we want. So yes, they are doing things, but we have to start thinking more in the complexity of the human trafficking to make prevention really working.
Absolutely. To add to that, I know we have a very short time. I did a policy paper in which I make these suggestions. We have to have a very dynamic and multifaceted policy framework. Yes, the government's programs work, but they have to be comprehensive and focused. There has to be coordinated collaboration between local, national, and international agencies. Each agency working on their own and not coordinating with others, it does not go anywhere. We have seen that because we have had these programs started in 2000 and we are now in 2022. If you look at the policy papers written in 2000, 2010, and 2020, and now 2022, we are basically the same place. So we need to make sure that they are coordinated. There's a coordinated collaboration. We need to reinforce prosecution, protection, prevention, and partnership simultaneously. We can't just focus on prosecuting or protecting or preventing, or we need to have a very closed partnership between all these different agencies. We should criminalize all forms of trafficking so that nobody is able to come and conduct business under the name of, for example, organ trafficking. I'm donating while you're being forced to give your kidney to a rich person and you're compensated nothing. So criminalize all kinds of human trafficking, provide solid and substantial support for victim protection, and you have a very strong and inflexible legislation. We have laws, but laws are only words on the paper if they're not implemented properly. So those are my suggestions that I make for all of us to work together, including the public.
Thank you so much for that. You know, I also wanted to add that I really think that it's so important to act intentionally to bring survivor leaders to the table in every possible domain, whether it's multidisciplinary teams or task forces, or if you're having a panel discussion, or, you know, in whatever domain that you're thinking about this issue. I think that it's important that survivors are in the lead position, are up in the front, okay? And so we all have a responsibility to making sure that's happening, or asking if we're on panels or involved in planning them, asking if that's part of the plan. And I think that, you know, I thank you so much, Mr. Bautista, for being here with us today as well, and for all the work that you're doing for this issue as well. And I want to thank all of you. This was a wonderful panel. You all have amazing experience to bring to the table, and we could sit here for hours and learn more. But unfortunately, our time is up. So I just want to extend our gratitude towards you. Thank you.
I want to say the last word. Thank you very much, everyone. And I would be very, very honored and appreciate if you guys can get in touch with me so we can work together. So we can coordinate, and what we have been preaching, we can actually bring to fruition. So Shara, Rafael, and Samantha, please, if you can send your emails or addresses or somehow for me to connect with you, or you connect with me, it will be absolutely great. Something good come out of this hour and a few minutes we spent together.
Of course, thank you so much for all of you. It has been amazing to hear, and thank you so much also for the university and the program for inviting me. And I really hope to keep in contact and to work together, of course.
Well, thanks everyone for the opportunity to be here. Thank you for joining and to do what's right. And I know it's gonna be some challenges in front, but we got this. We can get it done if we all fight together to do the right thing. And take care, be safe.
Thank you. I'm sure we all leave enriched from the various insights that we shared today. And thanks so much for the opportunity.